Now, storyboards, think of them as a very cheap way to check and see if your idea is going to work as a film. If your idea does not work, easy. You just quickly iterate with new drawings. That's really how we do it. Storyboarding is a way to establish the composition, the pacing, the cinematography, even the musical landscape. You can plan the entire production with storyboards. They're very powerful, especially if you know exactly what you're going to say with words. And what I mean by that, as an example, Leah in this cinematic is terrified of these lesser evils and Azmodan. Now that itself is what we call like a story beat, a simple story beat. Fear. Leah has to look afraid there. So what we do is we convey that by the way Leah cowers, her body language. We do that by her wide-eyed facial expression, and we do that what type of camera we choose to use to show her. All these things contribute. Now, every artist in cinematics, that's their goal. Every single artist, programmer, it doesn't matter who you are, if you're a modeler, animator, programmer, whatever, all of us, we have to do everything we can to contribute to story in whatever way possible. So, I'm going to hand it over to Graham.
Doing most of the time water, fire, atmosphere types effects. Generally throwing lots of particles around the screen. For example, here's 30,000 bunnies being exploded. Oh, there goes my little fuss. But we also have a little thing called intrinsic character effects I wanted to talk about. What you see here is something of the lesser evils that are on their thrones. And these were always envisioned as weeping smoke. So this is a pretty obvious effect, something you're going to see in the Cyanic quite easy. But we do a lot of other smaller character effects, which are not so apparent. His eyes, it's hard to imagine him without that characteristic. But it has to be subtle. It has to blend in. And most importantly, it has to add to the performance. It can't distract from the performance. It's hard to imagine Tychus without his cigar, for example. But if we make that too apparent and if it's too blatant, then it's going to distract from the story, and that's not what we want. If we're calling attention to ourselves with these types of effects, then we're doing it wrong. We're making it bigger than life, and that's not something we want to do. So to talk about pulling a little bit more from real life, Stephen, you want to talk about that?
Sure. Of some of the materials we actually used in Black Soulstone, we rendered them in different lighting scenarios to make sure that our CG material behaves similar to what real-life material would be. In here, you can see there's some wax we used for the candle. There's paper shader. There is cloth, leather, and wood. So these studies really help us to make a believable cinematic in the end. This is my, whoops, too fast. Here we go. This is my favorite. In the beginning of the show, the art director wanted Azmodan to be this, very
basically, absorb those changes as quickly as possible. There, he's sliding the leg around, and you'll notice some of the controls, basically pin it to different places just to make the animators' lives a little easier. And you can see on his face, he's got, numerous controls, and then those are also layered in different ways. And here you can just pull that one jaw control and you can make him talk. Okay. And to give you an example of some of the complex stuff that Azmodan does, in this shot, he's completely bent over. And a creature of this girth couldn't really do this, so we cheat it in CG. So let's pull the camera back and see what Azmodan is actually doing in this shot. He's completely flipped over, and you'll notice his body is just cracked in half. And his spike is going through his ass, and you can kind of see the backside of his crab butt there. And it's the advantage of CG. We're making an impossible creature. We are allowed to do impossible things. But again, rigs wouldn't really be anything without amazing animators, and we have the best animators in the world. I know because I've met all animators in the world, and we have the best ones. So here's James to talk about that.
Animating. Now, this shot in particular I wanted to show you because Nick had something very important in mind about Azmodan, and part of the story about him is we wanted to have him massive, huge, and sort of cumbersome, a little bit labored, 20% labored as, maybe you can turn the sound up on this one.
Fell into your trap, but not me.
So yeah, let me play that for you one more time.
One by one, our brethren fell into your trap, but not me.
This was our next production challenge. We had to get this guy to talk. Not only talk, but very close to the camera. So the first challenge is he doesn't have any lips. He can't, how does he speak without any lips? So the animator had to get very creative. We had to put something in there to substitute for lips, you know, and that's where the creativity comes in. We decided to use the teeth and all these weird different mandible pieces that he has on his mouth in order to make a seal and actually make it convincing that this huge demonic guy can actually talk. And it kind of works. One other thing about this was that it also lent well for the story. It just kind of happened that when you watch this animation, it's very unsettling. And when this guy kind of gets up in your grill really close and he's scaring Leah, it just has a very uneasy feel to it because you don't really see this sort of skeletal, toothy creature talk right at you. The next challenge after that was Azmodan's army. Now, Nick kind of gave us a criteria for this. For Azmodan's army, it had to be innumerable, just countless numbers of demons. They had to be chaotic, and it just needed to be sort of a primordial mess that was coming out of this mountain. Killer animation in the final cinematic. So you're getting a special BlizzCon treat here. This is the winged demon walking, and there's a special treatment that we did on the fingers and the wings and things like that.
All right. And so we knew we had to have a shot where we just had, you know, tons of demons and really show off like what Diablo is all about. And the cool thing is you get to kill these guys in the game, these actual demons. It's awesome. So this is an example. This terrain on the bottom is the entire, like what our environmental modelers built as this huge valley. And one of our concerns was that we'd actually have to fill up this entire valley full of demons. But luckily, once the camera was in place, you can see that that little red line represents the only demons we actually had to put in the scene, so we got away with a lot of that. In the upper left, you can see that as the trail kind of fades off towards the mountain, the demons themselves become smaller than individual pixels, so we just say, okay, we don't need any more demons back there. So that's how we go about and populate the scene. And one of the, you know, we pay so much attention to silhouettes and detail at Blizzard Cinematics. And so here is an example of some of the director's notes. So you'll notice we'll go in and we'll change individual demons' weapons. We'll say, well, this guy's carrying an axe, but we want the profile to look, you know, a little more dangerous, more threatening. So we're going to change these guys to have pole arms and just completely change. You know, we'll go into individual detail of adjusting the demons in this army that we have, you know, thousands of. And in the end, this is kind of how it looks. Not all of the demons are in here, but it gives you an idea. There's that wing demon James was talking about. And, you know, animation, rigging, this is just a small part of what goes into the cinematic. There's also effects, which really tie everything together and are so important. And Mike's here to talk about that.
So originally, Asmo was envisioned to have constant drooling lava coming out of his mouth while he was speaking. Here you can see some early tests for some of the things that we tried, just trying to get a fluid on a surface that was deforming and sort of complex, like maybe perhaps we didn't even have animation for done at this point. We just wanted to try it out. And we started working with this and going forward. Here's an early take that kind of looks like my daughter, my 2-year-old at dinner. How adorable. But as we started to pull it back into the real world, here's another early test. While Asmo was actually speaking, we were finding that the lava was starting to have a lot more questions than it was actually trying to answer. Like, for example, how fast was this lava going to move? How much farther down the chest was it going to go? And were we going to be worried about continuity of lava between shots? Because that would really take the level of difficulty way, way up. Here's another example where we took the speed and the viscosity of the lava way, way up and sort of way down so you could actually slow it down. And even this one, we were just wondering, maybe this isn't the right track. So finally, this is our final concept drool, and you can see by now we've actually pulled it way, way back. We only have 3 little rivulets of lava that are being pulled out of the corners of the mouth. And actually, we took this one all the way to completion. You can see here our final beauty pass for that particular shot, just these 3 tiny little rivulets of lava. But during the entire process while we were working on this, and the artist Bill LaBarge who was working on this, we were beginning to wonder, was this just too distracting? And it was kind of making Asimov feel sloppy, and actually even worse than that, it was starting to make him feel comical, which is not a story point. That's not something we wanted to go for. So we killed it. Here's a little breakdown of some of the more traditional effects around Asimov. Obviously, we have the glowing mouth. We have smoke and embers that are coming out, glowing eyes, and we even have a heat distortion plate on top of that. A little atmosphere on top of that, and there you have it. So I know I kind of glossed over quite a number of the lighting passes in there. Let me turn it over to Graham. He can tell you a little bit more about that.
All right, thanks, mate. Everybody's awesome work upstream. But seriously, the main job of the lighter is to light in a way that supports the story. Now, Black Soulstone was calling for something that was a lot more realistic and less stylized than some of our previous work. But when I say realistic, that's not quite the same as reality, and everything is very designed, and I would say the stylized reality is what we were really going for. Now, in order to achieve that more realistic look that we were going for, we had to adopt a number of techniques and technologies that have been used by some of the major motion picture visual effects studios. And I wanted to just say a quick thanks to John Lands and Chris Rock and all of the tools and development team guys who did such an amazing job improving our RenderMan pipeline throughout this production. So, lighting Leah, nobody looks good under a harsh spotlight. And so when we got into lighting Leah, we had to make some choices regarding the type of light sources that we were using. And here I'll show you a couple of different lighting passes that we did for Leah for this particular shot. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I'm mentioning here. Light can be hard or soft. And basically what that means is a hard light gets very sharp shadows, gets a lot of crisp details. A soft light is a lot more flattering for a character. How you achieve a hard or soft light is really a matter of how big the light source is. So we took some liberties here with Leah, and what we did was we combined elements from a hard spotlight, like the specular details on her face, with this sort of softer roll-off that you see on this soft area light, and we combined them together to achieve the final result. Now, when you're lighting a shot is all about layers. And there's two kinds of layers that we deal with in lighting that I'll talk about. The first I call lighting passes. So here you can see some of the different lighting passes for Leah. We've got key light, rim light, environment, fill. Now, light is additive. And what that lets us do is we can render out each of these lighting passes completely separate, and then we just add them all together to create the final result. So here you can see them adding together, and we've got the total lighting result for Leah. Now, once we've added all of these lights together, we can turn around and tint each one of them to a different color and intensity in order to control the final lighting for the scene. So here I'll show you an example where I'm tinting the different light colors to create completely different lighting results just using the same lighting passes. So the second kind of lighting layer that we talk about, I call render elements. And these are just the various components of a shot. And sometimes you have to separate a shot into these render elements simply to get it to render. And other times you separate it so that you have control over each of the layers. And so these are, you've got a matte painting background, you've got Azmodan, Leah, etc. And each of these render elements basically just gets layered from the back to the front. And so this is sort of a simplified example of how that works. We generally have many, many more layers than this, but this gives you the idea. And so here's the final lighting for the shot. Now, to talk a little bit more about some of these render elements that you see here and some of the effects passes, I'll hand it back to Mike.
Complicated. We want the shot to be as detailed as possible, and we knew it was going to be a challenge right from the start. Here's the shot as it exists in the cinematic. You can see we go from from an interior environment, and then we have to have this exposure change and go through all that to see the volcano behind as Azmodan reveals his plan. So with that in mind, we wanted to cut up this entire wall, and then we knew that was going to be very, very challenging, so I'll introduce one technical term, which is called Voronoi. Voronoi is a type of noise that you can use in production, and basically you can imagine as if you scattered a whole bunch of points along a plane, and then if I drew individual lines equal distance from all those points, I'd end up with something that looks like this, sort of like a cellular texture, or maybe dried up paint on the ground. If you take out the center of all these pieces and just leave the lines, you have something that sort of looks like a shattered window, and you could easily use these types of lines of force to cut up anything that you wanted. Add those things together or start combining them, some of these individual shapes, and you start to get some pretty organic looking type materials. And that's kind of what we have here. So this was partially some of the way that the wall was cut up. Here's the final animation of the wall and just a preview, and I just wanted to point out and put my hat off to James's team that this wall basically did not go through a simulation. Our director had something very specific in mind when he wanted to have this wall fall, and so most of these pieces were animated by hand, so crazy. Thank you. So once we had our animated wall, we decided we would take it a little further and gave it back to the modeling team. Here are some of the hero sculpts that the modeling did for some of those pieces, and started to put in pieces of the wall, the interior, almost like bricks and mortar, and even cement, you can imagine, in some of these. And once they were done with that, we handed that back, and we had our initial wall. So let's get to some of those effects passes that Graham was talking about. Here's our shot again, and we'll go a little bit into it, and then we'll freeze the frame for a second. So we start off with the initial one, which is just sort of little particle points and dust that's coming through that wall. Added that, we start adding rocks. The artist Hosuk Chang developed an enormous amount of rocks for this. I think there were over 40,000 little tiny rocks that are being generated as the pieces, combine and hit each other. And on the top of that, we put on a whole bunch of smoke and dust that's being in on either side of the wall. Let's add it back into the shot. So here's our rocks, here's our background, here's all of our effects passes on top of that. Once we have those, we'll put the characters back in. And finally, we'll start adding some more sort of volumetric atmosphere, a little bit more haze and dust, and there you have it. That's our final shot.